Welcome back, focused learners. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. We're taking a real deep dive into the fascinating, complex, and honestly, incredibly quirky world of Dungeons & Dragons Online, specifically its character enhancement trees. You see, we're going to look at the expectation of mathematically precise game design versus the rather wild reality of their documented bugs. So if we're looking to build truly expert-level characters, let's discover together how these systems actually function in reality, not just what the text promises.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this question perfectly sets the stage for what we're talking about today. In DDO, the Inquisitive Enhancement tree has this ability called Observation. It grants you defensive buffs when you use the Diplomacy skill on an enemy. Makes sense, right? But the reality? Well, the code doesn't exactly discriminate. You can literally use Diplomacy on a wooden door, a lever, or just some inanimate object, and the game goes ahead and grants you full defensive buffs anyway. It's this absurd, hilarious reality where talking nicely to furniture somehow makes you harder to kill. No way, right?
To really appreciate these quirks, we kind of need to understand the intended design first. Enhancement trees, they're the absolute backbone of character customization in DDO. They offer these thematically related enhancements, and they're meant to provide pretty much limitless, mathematically precise build options. You spend action points to carefully unlock tiers of power, expecting each point to precisely calculate your character's combat effectiveness. For an expert player, this is where you meticulously plan your perfect build. But as we're about to see, the math doesn't always math.
Right, so let's look at part 1, abilities that simply fail. If you're crafting a high-tier character, you absolutely must identify dead-weight abilities, where the in-game reality completely fails to match the tooltip text. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Take a look at the Paladin's Knight of the Chalice tree. The ranged Exalted Smite is supposed to be this primary attack that adds your charisma bonus to your attack rolls, plus bonus damage based on your Paladin level. The reality, though, a documented bug means it adds absolutely 0 charisma bonus and 0 level scaling. Nothing. It completely misses its intended mathematical scaling, basically rendering a core combat talent functionally irrelevant for an optimal build. You've got to swap that out.
Or consider the Fighter Ravager tree. Say you invest your hard-earned action points into Aura of Fear, expecting nearby enemies to suffer a -2 penalty to their stats. But actually, as of Update 72.1, this enhancement simply fails to function. It just doesn't trigger. It does literally nothing. So for an expert player analyzing which tree is the most stable, the Ravager tree presents a massive, clear trap here. You absolutely need to pull those points out and invest them somewhere else.
And hey, it's not just the martial classes dealing with this either. Druids using the Season's Herald tree can invest points to protect their plant-based crowd control spells from fire damage. The tooltip explicitly promises that your Grasping Thorns will no longer be dispelled by fire effects, yet players who actually rely on this find their expectations literally going up in flames, because the thorns continue to be destroyed by fire anyway. And man, the list of these frustrating calculation errors just goes on and on. For instance, Arcane Archers take Terror Arrows for an enchantment DC bonus that never actually applies. Arcane Tricksters pick up Arms of the Trickster expecting a critical damage multiplier, but accidentally get critical chance instead. Ninja Spies use Poison Darts that just flat out fail to deal ninja poison damage. If you're tailoring an expert character, you literally have to memorize these malfunctioning abilities and swap them right out of your rotation immediately to maintain your damage output.
Okay, moving on to part 2, accidental buffs and exploits. Let's shift the narrative a bit to the more humorous and, frankly, highly exploitable side of these documented bugs. When broken code accidentally turns your player into an absolute powerhouse. What's really interesting here is how an unassuming utility ability becomes a top-tier defensive necessity. The Inquisitive Tree's True Seeing enhancement is intended simply to grant you the True Seeing spell, period. However, in reality, it secretly and accidentally grants you the Epic Reflexes feat as well. This means you completely ignore natural 1s on reflex saves. If you're optimizing a character, the Inquisitive Tree is incredibly stable and highly desirable simply because of massive accidental defensive buffs exactly like this one.
Druids get in on the accidental fun too. The Nature's Warrior tree features an ability called Ghost Wolf. Now it's meant to provide minor, thematic defensive buffs. The reality? It appears to grant a massive 50% incorporeal defense. That means half of all physical attacks just phase right through you. It completely bypasses the intended limits of the ability and creates what is practically a mandatory pick for an expert druid build.
But perhaps the absolute funniest accidental bug belongs to the Cleric's Radiant Servant tree. So when you die with the Martyrdom ability active,
You're supposed to burst with healing light to save your party. But due to a bug, it heals for twice the intended amount, and, wait for it, it accidentally heals all enemy mobs as well. Yeah, it's the ultimate cleric fail. You sacrifice your very life only to fully heal the exact monsters you were trying to defeat. Just incredible.
Which brings us to part 3, Case Study, the Wild Mage.
If we're really comparing upgrade trees to identify the most stable versus the most broken, we absolutely must look at unstable sorcery within the Wild Mage tree. This is an enhancement tree so spectacularly glitched that it perfectly lives up to its chaotic name. So the crucial point is perfectly summarized right here: unstable sorcery. The bug? It simply does not function. You kind of have to love the hilarious brevity and bluntness of that documentation, right? You spend your action points, you put on no armor to gain the promised 2% spell critical damage, and absolutely nothing happens.
And let's see how this builds into an absolute cascade of math errors. The Tides of Chaos ability is supposed to give you random defensive buffs, but almost every single buff calculates incorrectly. Damage resistance gives you a flat 1 instead of scaling with your level. Energy resistance gives you double what it should. Physical and magical resistance ratings actually have your Wild Mage level instead of your total character level. You literally cannot predict your own stats. It's wild.
And then, oh man, there's power in chaos. This is supposed to be a simple toggle. You turn it on when you want to risk very bad wild magic surges for a boost in power. But the reality? The bug suppresses your surge control enhancements entirely, even when the toggle is turned off. Think about that. This enhancement actively punishes the player by breaking their other defensive abilities permanently. If you're building an expert wild mage, you must entirely avoid spending points on this node. Just skip it.
Visually summarizing the absolute chaos of building a wild mage is just staggering. You've got one slice for functioning intended mechanics, one slice for broken tooltips giving you random incorrect numbers, and a massive slice for actively detrimental code that flat out breaks your build. While some trees like the Inquisitive are highly stable and beneficial, the wild mage requires a literal masterclass in navigating broken mechanics just to survive.
12 plus. That's the minimum count of distinct, verifiable, and highly impactful bugs we've analyzed today across these various enhancement trees. And you know what? That's really just scratching the surface of the documented quirks in the system. To build an expert character, you have to be fully aware of this parallel reality of game mechanics.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought for you to ponder. When you're dealing with a system this complex, does a buggy, unpredictable reality make the game incredibly frustrating? Or does discovering that you can talk to a door for defensive buffs make it accidentally endearing? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep studying those bugs, keep tweaking those expert builds, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.